York's classic rock, Q1043.
Good morning and happy Father's Day. We have a really special Father's Day edition of Sunstein Sunday this morning, a format that we have never done. I'm going to introduce you to John Kostick. He was an electrician at the World Trade Center on September 11th, and like so many thousands of others, suffered numerous World Trade Center illnesses after, following weeks of working at Ground Zero. What is unique to John Kostick is that he has a very unusual 9/11 ailment. I mean, he has numerous ailments, but the most profound one, the most horrifying, the most traumatic one has robbed him of his ability to speak. John, if you just say a few words to the audience, introducing your son who will be answering the questions that you answered in writing today.
Okay. I am John. This is my son, Casey, who is a firefighter, and he can look at this from the perspective as a son and as a firefighter.
Okay, so John is introducing his son, Casey, who is a firefighter. So he is going to be talking about, answering the questions that I posed to John in writing, but then we'll also talk to him as a firefighter. Okay, so you heard, this is what John Kostick lives with every day. He has a 9/11 story to tell. He has a story to tell of what happened after. He is desperate to tell his story, and he has been robbed of his ability to tell his story himself. Imagine living with that the rest of your life. Every time you open your mouth, you're reliving 9/11. Okay, so my first question is, tell us what you experienced on 9/11. Where were you? What job did you have? What happened when the plane hit?
In 2001, I was living on the side of a mountain in Greenbrook, New Jersey. And when I let the dogs out in the morning, I would stand on the front porch before dawn and look out at the Manhattan skyline and see the Twin Towers every morning. On September 11th, 2001, I was working as an electrician, and my particular job was providing services for Lehman Brothers, based in the American Express building at 200 Vesey Street, also known as World Financial Center Building 3. Lehman Brothers also had floors in other surrounding buildings, including Tower 1 of the World Trade Center. I was given a work order for a job in Tower 1 on the 39th floor, and I took a new guy, Tommy, with me. He just started that day. After we completed the job, we were heading for the elevators to go up and have coffee, and my pager went off. We went back into the data center to make the call, and right as I hung up, there was a loud explosion, and the building began to rock. The lights flickered, and the fire alarm was going off as we got up off the floor. I looked out of the window, and there was debris falling from the sky and more sheets of paper than you could imagine. My first reaction was to think that a bomb had exploded above us, and I surprisingly didn't feel threatened. I guess I was in a daze, and Tom grabbed me and said that we had to get out of there, so we headed for the A stairwell. The stairs were crowded with people who were heading downward, and there didn't seem to be any panic. At one point, I began to see the firefighters climbing up on the outside of the steps, so we moved to the inside. I remember sensing someone passing me on the right, and as I turned to ask them if they could stay to the inside, I found myself looking at a man that was completely burned, and I could only see the white in his eyes and teeth. With him was a woman wearing a polyester dress that had completely melted to her body. Someone said that they were coming down from the 78th floor. I saw the faces of firefighters as they passed. I noticed some probies as well, and I remember saying to one of them, "Welcome to the job." Their faces spoke volumes. Seasoned FDNY firefighters that had a look in their eyes like they knew this was a really bad situation and yet no fear. I was at the top of a staircase and the bottom was flooded and there was a woman next to me. I picked her up and carried her across into the mezzanine level and never saw her again. I also lost Tom by then and was on my own. I noticed the huge windows overlooking the plaza were dirty or stained, and as I looked closer, I realized it was blood. On the ground, my eyes focused on the upper torso of a man, and his organs were splayed out like a dead animal on the side of a highway. I looked around outside, and there were bodies and debris everywhere. A Port Authority officer was standing at a doorway that led to the plaza, and I needed to get across into the next building. He stepped out, and I looked up. He stepped out and looked up, telling me to wait. A body crashed down nearby, and then he told me to hurry up and run across so I wouldn't get hit. I followed a trail of blood, and then he told me to hurry up and run across so I wouldn't get hit. I'm sorry, I lost my place there. I followed a trail of blood through the pedestrian bridge across to the Winter Garden and tried to get back upstairs in the Amex Tower. The building was closed down and they had evacuated it, and so I went outside by the marina. I finally got to see the extent of the fire raging at both towers. It was surreal to look up at the people who had broken out the windows and were now standing on the ledge screaming, and I heard their screams. I was in shock and horrified at what I was watching, but I couldn't look away. I watched the fire creeping downward floor by floor, and as it would get close to someone, they would jump, and the sound of their body crashing to the ground echoed like a gunshot. My eyes focused on a group of about 8 people, all men and 1 woman. The fire was now a few floors above them, and the intensity of the heat made them do the unthinkable. One at a time, they jumped until only a man and woman were left. They reached out and held hands, and together they jumped, and then the echo.
When did your family know that you were safe?
I honestly don't know. It was probably within a few hours. There were very few phones around, and I didn't own a cell phone yet. And the pay phones had long lines of people if they worked at all. I remember seeing a few people with cell phones and asked if they could please call my family and tell them that I was okay. I think about that now and wonder if they ever realized how important that small favor was, to call a complete stranger's phone number and explain to my family that I was alive.
How long and what kind of work did you do at Ground Zero after September 11th?
I spent a few weeks with my old crew and bounced around to get our client up and running in any office they could find with any computer equipment they could get their hands on. I eventually made it into the Mercantile Exchange to work and ended up back in the Amex building as a foreman. Our job was to restore power, security, and data systems and restore the building. The east side, which faced the north tower, had 25 floors of blown out windows, debris, and the southeast corner stripped off. I had a corner office on the 24th floor that overlooked the pile, and all of that turmoil, I somehow was able to process it daily by being in the middle of it and working with another survivor who happened to be an old work friend. I think we both had that 1,000-yard stare and just knew when to step up and support each other. But the dust was always there, inside and out, and the smell was unlike anything I ever smelled before, like a rotting, burning, vile incense.
When did you first get symptoms of a 9/11 illness?
Not long after the incident, I began psychological sessions and was given prescriptions to help cope, and especially to sleep. In the fall of 2002 was when the internal stuff started to happen. I woke up one night thinking I was having a heart attack and was taken to a local ER. It was discovered that I had a GERD attack. Within a few months, I had a second one, and then the testing began. This is when I first got involved with the World Trade Center Health Program, which has been probably the greatest resource for me in my health.
And what are your 9/11 illnesses?
I currently have 12 certified health conditions, and there may be more soon as we are doing some more extensive pulmonary testing. These include major depressive disorder, PTSD, and anxiety, chronic nasal and sinus issues, which required surgery, esophageal reflux, chronic laryngitis, vocal cord spasms, malignant melanoma, and cervical and lumbar trauma. I think the worst one for me, though, is losing my voice.
You're listening to the answers I posed to John Kostick, who was an engineer surviving the World Trade Center attack on September 11th and also worked for weeks after at Ground Zero. And in addition to his numerous illnesses, he was robbed of his ability to speak. So his son, Casey, is answering the questions I posed to John. How did this impact your career?
It ended my career. I woke up one morning and could never go back to New York City ever again. I lost my paycheck, health benefits for my children and wife, pension credits. My family really had to struggle for a few years. There was a rule that I could only receive a disability pension from my union if I claimed it within 2 years of 9/11. The problem with that is not too many people were sick back then, and the real health issues hadn't surfaced yet. I'm still trying to get my pension from them.
So how much help did you get from the Victim Compensation Fund?
After 9/11, people and companies were quite generous in helping the families of the victims, and there were seven-figure payouts to many people. I heard of families having property taxes and car payments excused, and then it all stopped. Remember that this happened while we were working, which means it's a workers' compensation claim, which excludes you from suing employers, and others. It wasn't until I was diagnosed with cancer in 2017 that I was actually able to get a small award from the VCF, which was enough to get my house out of foreclosure and pay my back taxes.
And how did this impact your family life?
I got divorced twice. I take a handful of pills every morning and every night. I can't speak to parents or children on the phone. I had to do construction work on my own because I never knew if I would get out of bed that day. I spent 15 years with no health benefits except for things related to Ground Zero. My children have been my greatest support system, but I often wonder what questions they have or have been asked by their friends. I would really love to know the answer to this question. I would really love to know what the answer to this question would be if you asked them. I can't imagine what it's been like for them, but then again, we aren't the only family that's been affected by this tragic event.
And what do doctors say about your inability to talk?
Funny thing about that is that some of my doctors have given me their personal numbers so we can text message each other. The only doctor that said he could fix me is a specialist in Philadelphia, who of course is out of network and a long drive to get to. I'm currently trying an acupuncture in my neck and vocal cords to try and release the muscle strain. It's like I have this giant knot in my neck muscles that won't relax. We've tried different medications, therapies, and I've even had Botox injections into my vocal cords. What I'm really hoping for is to get into a study where they are using psilocybin for treating depression and to see if it can release my anxiety.
And as I mentioned, John Kostick told me earlier, there's just less than a handful of people who have suffered this same disability from 9/11. So you've said to me that people remember 9/11 once a year, yet you live it every time you try to talk. Explain to our audience what that's like for you.
It's like Pearl Harbor Day. The people that experienced the tragedy are no longer with us, and to the generation since, it's just a date on the calendar that very few have any actual connection to. Same is true for 9/11. To most people who are old enough to remember, it was a tragic day that is in the past, and every year small groups of people gather together to pay their respects to the people that they never knew and then go on with their lives. If a soldier loses an arm and leg in battle, he or she is reminded of that horrific moment when it happened every single day when they look at their scars. For me, it's every word that I try to speak. It's every time I try to speak on a phone or even with someone in public. It's every time I look into a person's eyes and I can see that they can't understand a word of what I'm trying to say.
We're going to break now. When we come back, again, I'm going to be posing questions that are really meant for John Kostick, who was an engineer who survived the September 11th attack on the Twin Towers and then worked as an electrician in the recovery. He was robbed of his ability to speak, so answering the questions for the father that he is to his son, Casey, a firefighter, will be answering his questions in a moment, so stay with us, Q104.3. And we return with John Kostick and his son, Casey, answering the questions I posed to John because John was robbed of his ability to speak, just one of his numerous 9/11 illnesses. What is your life like now?
My number one worry in my life is that I want to make sure that my life is in order so that my kids don't have to go through mountains of paperwork that is important now. Not worth shit when I'm dead. I jump in a fire truck now with my kids that weren't even born yet on 9/11, when 9/11 happened. I live in a place that brings me peace, and I have a black lab puppy named Millie after a Rescue 5 guy. In social settings, I'm embarrassed to try to speak, especially with people that don't know my background. I can't afford to live in my own house in California, New Jersey anymore. I get food stamps to eat and social security to pay my mortgage and taxes. Funny thing is that I've developed some great relationships with some friends in town that are equally damaged for other reasons, and we help each other out and check up on each other.
Are you angry? Do you have regrets?
Am I angry? I wouldn't know who to be angry with. There's so many theories and conspiracies about what happened that day, but the fact is that it happened and life keeps moving on. I was angry in September this year when society decided that it would be more convenient and cost effective to have their ceremonies on September 10th, and people were just okay with that. The 4th of July is on the 4th of July. It just is. We don't change it to make a 3-day weekend. September 11th to September 11th. Don't fuck with it and disrespect the people who were there. As for regrets, I wish I could have had a camera with me to document the things that nobody else got to see or experience unless you were there. I don't mean twisted bodies. I mean the faces, the walls, full of pictures of missing people. The private areas by the marina where the missing cops and firemen faces were posted with notes from their loved ones.
What else would you like to impart to the listeners at Q104.3, John?
Just be kind. Pay it forward when you can. Every one of us is living with some kind of trauma from our past. You have no idea what someone's story is unless you sit down with them and offer to listen. Just because someone can't talk as fast as you doesn't mean that they aren't 6 steps ahead of you with their knowledge.
All right, Casey, the son of John Kostick. First of all, Casey, how old are you?
I am 32.
Okay, what do you remember on September 11th, 2001?
So I'll preface this with the fact that at that age, in middle school and stuff like that, I was always getting in trouble for some reason in school, always getting called to the principal's office, right? So I remembered that morning, school year had just started, and I get called to the principal's office bright and early. And I'm like, what did I do already? That was the only thing going through my head. I was like, what am I in trouble for already? And then I remember they brought me in, sat me down, and said what was going on in the city. But, you know, how old was I? I was in 7th grade, I guess, something like that. So I didn't really comprehend exactly what was happening. I just knew that he worked in the city and the towers had fell down and whatever.
But when did you realize your dad was in danger?
I don't really know because so he was able, I guess, to reach out to my mom somehow to say that he had made it out before the buildings came down. So we knew he was out. We just couldn't get a hold of him. And then I remember a friend's mom picked me up from school, brought me home to my mother, and I was just trying to call his pager for a couple of hours. And then finally we got a call back and he said he was, you know, I think he was in Staten Island and he was on his way back home to us.
What is your feelings about what your dad has endured?
I don't know. It sucks. I mean, it changed, you know, it changed our whole family's lives, basically. I'm not really sure. It's like frustration sometimes, especially like with the voice thing, because I know, you know, how much it's restricted him being able to do numerous different things, you know. So there's a lot of frustration behind it. Not at him, just at, you know, what the reality of the situation is.
What was it like for you growing up with all of this, with your friends living such a different life at home, and you really living 9/11 through your father throughout, your teenage years and young adulthood.
Um, I don't know, because I don't know.
You
I
didn't
don't know
talk
what.
about it to your friends?
Not really. I mean, it'll come up occasionally, but it's kind of something that if they didn't have any immediate personal connection to it, then nobody will really understand what it's like. But in the same sense as, like, I don't know exactly how to describe what it's like differently than somebody it didn't happen to, because I don't know, that's just the way it was for me. You know what I mean?
What made you want to become a firefighter?
He had been a volunteer firefighter when he was younger, in his early 20s and stuff. And I remember growing up, and he would talk about that sometimes and stuff like that. And I always thought it was really interesting. And then when we were when we were living in Greenbrook, he had become friends with somebody. They were doing, a mutual work, different construction work together and stuff, who was on one of the local fire departments as a volunteer. And I don't know if it was my idea or his idea to basically join together. I was 16, so we joined the local volunteer fire department together. And I guess that's what started it. From there, I turned it into a career. So
And where are you a firefighter?
I'm in Plainfield, New Jersey.
Okay. Do you have any anger about all this?
I
You
mean,
don't sound like you do, actually.
no, at times I do. I mean, I guess mainly with people that like to talk about it and act like, they have strong feelings about what happened on 9/11, but meanwhile they have no actual connection to it. Like I said before, like, they don't know anybody that died in the towers. Maybe their neighbor's cousin's brother. You know what I mean? But like, they never feel the weight of what happened or live with it in some capacity. I think the people that are ignorant to what really went on is like the most annoying or frustrating thing about it.
What about your sister? Now, how old is your sister?
She's
I
28.
we all forget. I put you on the spot. But
28.
how has this affected her through your eyes?
I'm not really sure. I mean, I'm sure she has a lot of the same feelings I do about it. I don't know. We've never really talked about it, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, and my sister she lived out in Arizona for, I don't know, a good chunk of her 20s, like right after high school, and a good chunk of her 20s. So like, I didn't see her much. We didn't really like talk a whole lot. I'd see her maybe once or twice a year for a holiday or something like that. So honestly, I'm not really sure.
It's interesting. I've spoken to a number of children of FDNYers, the children of FDNYers who suffered 9/11 illnesses and have died. And I remember we were going to do interviews the same day, and they immediately became best friends because they immediately sensed that they lived the same life and that others couldn't understand what they had experienced. And what was most disturbing to them was the PTSD that their fathers suffered. How was that for you growing up? How did your father's PTSD manifest?
I think I was maybe kind of too young at the time to really realize how bad it was. So I kind of really didn't know about it until I was older, and it was, that bad. his voice had started going away, and that's when, other stuff was really starting to show. It's, it's weird. It sucks because there's things that we'd like to do. Like I remember a few years back asking him if he would be able to go to the city for a couple, what was it, Eric Clapton, Elton John? I wanted to get the tickets to, and I think, where was it? It was either in Brooklyn or the Bronx. They were doing the concert, but like he couldn't go because,
Who's wedding?
oh yeah, or his cousin got married a few years back, and they did like a dinner cruise that left out of Hoboken, or Jersey City rather, right around Manhattan, and he wasn't able to go to that just because of the fact that being on the water, being that close to the city, just wasn't possible for him.
Were there any anger issues?
For me or for him?
No, for your dad, because that seemed to be a common problem.
No, anger or just frustration.
Yeah, I wouldn't say anger in the sense that, he would lash out or anything like that nature, but definitely, like he said, like frustration at certain things, mainly with the voice thing would be the biggest factor with that.
How old were you when he started to lose his voice? Do you remember?
I don't, was it probably towards the end of high school, I guess? Maybe a little bit after that.
Toward the end?
I would say probably 18, 19, 20, somewhere around there.
And did you immediately realize that was 9/11 related, or what did you think at the time?
When it started, it wasn't anywhere near the way it is now. So, I mean, we knew that it was related to 9/11, but it wasn't that bad. I mean, there was the first couple of years of it, he was still easy to understand, and then until it just nosedived to the point where you really couldn't understand him unless you had been there through the progression of his voice getting worse. Like I can understand everything he says easily just because I'm used to it.
A thought just came into my mind. Have you two considered sign language? Because that would be a way of communicating, and it's becoming more universal. I'm just trying to put a thought out there because it sounds like it just got worse and worse. And since they don't really know the cause, it's kind of frustrating in terms of looking for the cure.
Yeah, it's actually never crossed my mind before at all. I don't know if it's ever crossed his, but.
John, are you open to it? No, he's not open to it. Okay, yeah.
He not in circles of people who would understand sign language.
Casey, can you repeat what he said, please?
Yeah, he said he's not in circles of people who would understand sign language.
Okay.
So,
Gotcha. Casey, is there? Yeah.
I was going to say it could help, for anybody that would learn, like if me and him were to learn together, we could sign to each other. That's great, but it wouldn't really help him with anybody else,
And again, you understand him. Does your father do you live with your dad?
No, I don't.
So your dad lives alone?
Well, with his dog.
Okay, well, that's not alone. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up, Casey?
Back, I remember you asked about my sister and her feelings about it and stuff. She actually, a few years back, I remembered she got a tattoo on her wrist of the number 39 in Roman numerals, which was the floor he was on in the tower.
Okay.
So, yeah,
Well, this was
deals with stuff in her own way also.
Yeah. I'm so sorry for what your family endured, but I'm so happy to get this story out to our listeners so that they understand. I mean, I say it all the time. 9/11 didn't end on 9/11, and it continues. not just for John Kostick and Casey Kostick, but for 500,000 people who were exposed to the toxic dust. And most of those 500,000 people just do not connect the dots between the illnesses, the cancers, the respiratory illnesses that they've had over the last 20 years, and the 9/11 dust. And that is my goal, is to get the word out, because there is help. Free healthcare for life in every state, compensation from the Victim Compensation Fund, but some things you cannot replace. You cannot replace a life. You cannot replace John Kostick's voice. We must never forget on this Father's Day, think of those we lost and what they have lost. And if you have missed any part of this conversation, download the iHeartRadio app. It is free, and my conversations live on under the podcast Sunstein Sessions. And treasure your dad today. And I'll see you guys tomorrow morning on the Jim Kerr Rock and Roll Morning Show, Q104.3.
New York's classic rock, Q104.3.